Tuned into the Business Hour on OFM, the sound of your life. I'm Ulebogeng Motsi. Xpatweb, a provider of immigration audit services, has recently published its critical skills list for 2021. And this list details that IT jobs are currently amongst some of the most in-demand jobs across the country. Now, to delve into what some of the other most in-demand jobs are, we're sitting down with Marisa Jacobs. She's the managing director at Xpatweb. Good evening, Marisa. Can you take us through some of the 10 most in-demand skills in SA at the moment?
So we've been running the survey over 5 years, and the latest results this year indicate, in terms of the top 10 skills most in demand, is engineers, ICT specialists, foreign language speakers, and then also media and marketing specialists, artisans, C-suite executives, including senior financial executives, and we also see a high demand for healthcare professionals, science professionals, and accounting professionals. So that's a quick view of your top 10.
Looking at the increased demand, though, for ICT professionals and engineers, was this demand driven by the COVID-19 pandemic?
That's such an interesting question, and I think there's many factors that influence why skills are in demand, and I think we would be amiss to not contribute some of that to COVID-19. I think it has definitely had an impact in terms of demand, but also if we look at ICT specialists and engineers and we look at the survey over the past 5 years, they've always been in the top 3. So they've always been in high demand, so it hasn't pushed them from not being in the top 10 to now all of a sudden being in the top 10 or in higher demand in the top 10. So they've always been in demand, but I do think that the large focus on technology at the moment and how COVID has driven sort of a remote working environment, it's also driven many industries that had no dependency on technology or very little dependency on technology to have a way higher dependency on that. And I think that will absolutely globally impact the demand for ICT professionals.
You guys have been doing this for 5 years. What have you noticed, what's changed over the years with regards to your top 10 most critical in-demand skills?
Surprisingly, it's over about 5 or 6 of those occupations, it's remained incredibly steady. One of the ones that have jumped out this year is foreign language speakers. And in the past, it's hovered at sort of the 4% mark. It's jumped to 10% this year. And I suspect that that's because they removed it from the draft list that was published earlier this year. And it sort of gave the industry a bit of a jolt to say we need to do something about this. So that's definitely interesting. And then as well, the media and marketing specialists. I mean, you mentioned earlier that it's seen as a soft skill, and there's this tendency to think those are not in high demand. But I think with the change in the media and marketing landscape and what that looks like compared to a few years ago and how it's really become a prominent feature on the C-suite agenda in terms of how do we deal with marketing. And that is definitely one of the reasons why we're seeing that if I look at it over the past few years, it's gone from 2% to 6% and this year to 9%. And so quite a significant increase.
What languages in the foreign language section are the ones that are most in demand?
So I think not surprisingly, French is number 1. I think that is also largely because we've got so many French-speaking countries in Africa, and South Africa is obviously used as a gateway to Africa, so that's definitely there. And then second is German, Mandarin, Italian, Spanish, Dutch, Portuguese, Arabic, Russian, and Brazilian. That's the top 10.
Interesting. So some BRICS countries there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very reflective of that, exactly that BRICS countries, and then as well the influence that we have from Africa and China, of course.
We're speaking with Marisa Jacobs. She's the managing director at Xpatweb regarding the critical skills survey for 2021. Now, Marisa, what are some of the factors that influence the challenges that businesses face in recruiting the right person for financial roles within companies?
Such an interesting question. I unpack it quite a bit in the results. I've got a specific section around that, but a brief overview of that is the challenges that we see when we chat to our clients who are bringing the C-suite financial guys in is that it's a lot of the time it's got to do with international experience. And these are multinationals that are setting up businesses in South Africa or South African businesses expanding into Africa or globally. And when they're looking for financial execs, they're really looking for someone who has dealt with cross-border finance before or who has dealt with expansions of that kind before. It's also interesting to note that on the previous critical skills list or the current list that we're using, there's only 3 financial positions on that list, being financial investment advisor, external auditor, and by extension CFO. If we look at the new proposed draft list, there's 8 new financial positions on there, all sort of in the accounting sphere. So we're definitely seeing a growth in the accounting field.
Is one of the contributory factors the brain drain that we see? So immigration, is that a problem that's causing a shortage of those skills?
I think it definitely impacts. I mean, if we look at skill shortages, the demand that outweighs supply. And if we look at the factors that influence supply, it would definitely be because South Africans are moving abroad looking for greener pastures. So absolutely an impact, yeah.
In terms of global competition for critical skills, does South Africa reflect the rest of the world? Are we all looking for the same skills, or are we seeing a difference?
I love this question because this is the thing that we get out of context so quickly. As people will often ask me, why does South Africa have this terrible shortage of skills? What are we doing wrong? And it is so not unique to South Africa. It is a global demand. If we look at our list of critical skills and we look at the list of the UK, Australia, I mean, name the country, we are all looking for the same skills. There's a massive global migration of skills at the moment, and we are not the only ones. But that also means that we are competing for those skills. So it makes us feel better temporarily, but then we realize, oh goodness, if everyone's competing for these skills, then South Africa, we need to up our game to be able to attract those skills.
That was my conversation with Marisa Jacobs. She's the managing director at Xpatweb. Now, Xpatweb is a provider of immigration audit services that has recently published the critical skills list for 2021. Now, Marisa was explaining that some of the shortage of skills that we see in South Africa are not just unique to South Africa. You're seeing these shortages in other developed countries, Australia, she mentioned. But that also means that we are in competition for those particular skills, specifically IT skills, which were amongst the most in demand.